Chapter 121. Midnight. The Forecastle Bulwarks. Stubb and Flask mounted on them and passing additional lashings over the anchors there hanging. No, Stubb, you may not pound that knot there as much as you please, but you will never pound into me what you were just now saying. And how long ago is it since you said the very contrary? Since you once said that whatever ship Ahab sails in, that ship should pay something extra on its insurance policy, just as though it were loaded with powder barrels aft and boxes full of Lucifers forward. Stop now, didn't you say so? Well, suppose I did. What then? I've put my part changed my flesh since that time. Why not my mind? Besides, supposing we are loaded with powder barrels aft and Lucifers forward, how the devil could the Lucifers get a fire in this drenching spray here? Why, my little man, you have pretty red hair, but you couldn't get a fire now. Shake yourself, your Aquarius or the water bearer. Flask, you might fill pitchers at your coat collar. Don't you see, then, that these extra risks the marine insurance companies have extra guarantees? Here are hydrants, Flask, but hark again, and here I'll answer ye the other thing. First, take your leg off from the crown of the anchor there, though I can pass the rope. Now listen. What's the mighty difference between holding a mast lightning rod in the storm and standing close by a mast that hasn't got a lightning rod at all in a storm? Don't you see, you timberhead, that no harm can come to the holder of the rod unless the mast is first struck? What are you talking about, then? Not one ship in 100 carries rods, and Ahab, aye, man, and all of us. We're in no more danger, then, in my poor opinion, than all the crews in 10,000 ships now sailing the seas. Why, you king post, you? I suppose you would have every man in the world go about with a small lightning rod running up the corner of his hat, like a militia's officer's skewered feather, and trailing behind like a sash. Why don't you be sensible, Flask? It's easy to be sensible, why don't ye? Any man with half an eye can be sensible. I don't know that, Stubb. You sometimes find it rather hard. Yes, when a fellow's soaked through, it's hard to be sensible. That's a fact. And I've a mind about drenched with this spray. Never mind. Catch that turn there and pass it. Seems to me we're lashing down these anchors now as if they were never going to be used again. Tying these two anchors here, Flask, seems like a man's hands behind them. And what big, generous hands they are, to be sure. These are your iron fists, eh? What hold have they, too, I wonder? Flask, whether the world is anchored anywhere, if she is, she swings with an uncommon long cable, though. There, hammer that knot down. We've done. So, next to touching land, lightning on the deck is the most satisfactory. I say, just wring out my jacket skirts, will ye? Thank ye. They laugh at long togs so, Flask, but it seems to me a long-tailed coat ought to always be worn in all storms afloat. The tails tapering down to the way, serve to carry off the water, d'ye see? Same with cocked hats. The cocks form gables and eave troughs, Flask. No more monkey jackets and tarpaulins for me. I must mount a swallowtail and drive down a beaver, so. Hello, whoa, there goes my tarpaulin overboard. Lord, Lord, that winds come from heaven should be so unmannerly. That's a nasty night, lad. So this is the end of chapter 121. And Ahab said, okay, lash down the anchors, lash up the mast, tie everything down. And Starbuck says, we're probably not good. It's like we're not going to use these anchors ever again. And the thing is that the Pequod uses its anchors every 5 years. I mean, that sounds so weird to think about, but they set sail from Nantucket. They carry all the water and food aboard that they need. They rarely see land. They have no real reason to go to land. They process the whales on the sea. They have their food with them. They have their water with them. They have all of their supplies with them. They can manufacture boats from bits of whale. And so it's this sort of constant recycling. And what do they need their anchors for? They need their anchors if there's a severe problem with the boat and they have to put in to shore someplace. Or when they go home to Nantucket. They could almost have the anchors rowed out to them while they're in Nantucket port. I mean, that's stupid to do because, anchors are big and heavy. And you don't want to put a big anchor in a little boat and carry it out to the big boat and risk sinking the little boat and risk dropping the anchor and risk the boat crashing into stuff. But it doesn't really need the anchors. They use them when they're in Nantucket, and that's about it. And they're talking about risk here. And it's like, sailing with Ahab is like carrying matches and gunpowder. Lucifers was the old-timey name for matches because it was made with sulfur and phosphorus. And when you struck the two of them, it generated a spark and burned brightly. And the sulfur just smells horrible. And I mean, the devil is often described as having this sulfurous smell. And sulfur is like rotten eggs, which you probably don't know about. But when you smell, at some point you're going to be introduced to what sulfur smells like. And once you know what sulfur smells like, you will know sulfur because it's just like a very distinct smell. And as I said, it's kind of like rotten eggs because eggs have a lot of protein. And so when protein breaks down, it releases sulfur dioxide. And so sulfur dioxide is what you smell. So, comparing it to saying, hey, when you go out and you have insurance, if you're doing risky things like carrying around matches and gunpowder, you need more insurance. And then Flask was like, well, yeah, but you also need extra protection. Like, here's water to put out the fire, and you're not going to catch anything on fire with this much water because they're still in the middle of the big storm. And he talks about wanting to have a long coat so that he keeps his legs from getting wet because the long coat, just the water goes all the way off and down the coat and off and misses the legs and keeps them dry. Now, in cold, wet weather, I tend to prefer not to wear long pants because it always splashes up from the feet and the bottom of the pants get wet. So I'm a big fan of wearing short pants in wet, cold weather because the skin dries faster than the pants do and you don't get these little salt rings around it from if you're walking through snow and they put salt down on the snow, then what happens is the salt soaks into the pants and it wicks up to whatever level the water takes it. And as it wicks up to whatever level the water takes it, you have salt. And the salt only makes it up to a certain level. So when the water gets up to so high, you have a ring of salt right there. Now, when I'm out working in the yard and I'm wearing a shirt, and I get hot and I get sweaty and I sweat, the same thing sort of happens because sweat has a lot of salt in it. And so as the sweat pours off of me, it goes down the shirt and I get this ring of where the sweat stopped on the shirt. And then if I cool down and then go out and work some more, I could get layers of rings as, different layers of sweat pushed down. It's kind of nasty, but, that's wear short pants in the winter because, the salt only goes up so far, but sometimes I get cold. And when I get cold, I need the extra protection of the long pants. But here he is, he's talking about the hat. And the type of hats they had then common were 3-corner hats. So it's shaped like a triangle. And it has a brim, and the brim is turned up on the sides, and it's turned up in the back. And what that does is the rain falls down, it goes down to the brim, and it pours off at the points of the triangle. So it allows them to control and somewhat keep the water off of them. And so he's talking about, oh yeah, I'm happy with the long coat. I don't want, the short coat, and I don't want to carry a tarp over me and all of that stuff. So here it is. They're lashing up, and they're also talking about the danger. And as I said, Ahab was a madman waving around the harpoon with the big metal point in the lightning storm. And it had already been it already had the glow, and here he was waving it around. So Ahab was being a madman here, and they're kind of writing it off. It's like, well, most ships don't have lightning rods, and if it's going to strike the lightning rod, it'd strike the, if it's going to strike the harpoon, it'll strike the mast first. So, he's pretty safe there. And it's true. Lightning will strike the tallest thing. And trees and such offer a sort of cone of protection where if you are far enough from the tree, it's a 30-ish to 45 degree angle from the top of the tree down and out. If you're within that cone, the lightning will strike the tree before it strikes you. The problem is that if you're too close to the tree, when the lightning strikes the tree, the lightning comes down around the tree and goes through you as well. So what winds up happening is you get zapped by the lightning in the tree. And lots of people die. Most people who get struck by lightning are standing under a tree when they get hit. That and golfers. And golfers are waving around metal sticks in thunderstorms, and that's why they get struck. But most people who get struck are standing underneath a tree. And several years ago, your Lolly and I were at a NASCAR race in the Poconos. And there was a big thunderstorm. And so because there was a big thunderstorm, they closed down the race and everybody went under the grandstands. And there were a whole bunch of people who were like congregating and leaning on the metal supports of the grandstands. And we told them, that's not safe. Because if lightning strikes the building, which the lightning is going to strike the building because this big thunderstorm, and you're right next to the posts are going to get electrified and you'll get shocked. Well, we stood around waiting underneath the grandstands for a little bit, and then half an hour or so later, we decided to go out into the car. And so we dashed through a lighter part of the rain and got into the car. And in the car, you're safe because lightning goes around the outside. And the car is a nice metal shell, and so if lightning strikes the car, it goes bzzz around the outside. And there's a great demonstration of this at the Boston Science Museum, where they shoot scale lightning bolts, and there's a guy inside of a cage. And he's in a metal cage next to this huge Tesla coil, and they're shooting lightning bolts at him. They're shooting lightning bolts at the audience, just this thunder, crackling lightning. And he's running his hand along the inside of the cage because lightning goes around the outside. So your Lolly and I knew this, so we were in the car and we were safe because it's a nice metal box and the lightning runs around the outside. And so even if the car got hit, it didn't. But even if the car got hit, we'd be safe. We later found out that there were some people who were leaning up against one of the poles, the support poles. And did they get killed? Yeah, and it was an easy up? Okay. So they were in the parking lot. Okay. Your Lolly corrected me. They were killed in an easy up, which is a small little tent. So here you have this metal tent in the parking lot. And because the easy ups are big enough for me to stand under, which is bigger than most cars, the easy up was the tallest thing around. And because they were underneath it and close to it, they ended up getting hit. And it wasn't enough of a full cage around them to protect them like the car was. So that is Flask, and that is Starbuck talking about how dangerous it is, and maybe not quite realizing just how dangerous they are, and making a comment of, gee, we don't even really need these anchors, but that kind of also foreshadows, will they even get home?